Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I've only got about 3 or 4 pictures. East Shore Freshwater Habitat was formed about 4 years ago. We now have over 200 members from Boswell to Riendell, and the primary purpose was to try to increase the kokanee habitat in all the local creeks, because 75% of the spawn of kokanee in Kootenai Lake, in the main lake, comes from a man-made spawning ground up at Meadow Creek. So it just didn't seem reasonable that we should let all these creeks, man-made floods, things that demolish the spawning grounds. So we're trying to bring that back. And we were right, because the spawn at Meadow Creek went from over 100,000 a year. 2 years ago, they had 8,000 up there. So it's important that we bring them back. So over the last few years, we've put about 300,000 kokanee fry into Crawford Creek. We started with Crawford, as it's pretty well the main creek in the area. And last year, we put 150,000 kokanee eggs into Crawford Creek. So what I thought today is showing you what we've done. We buried these, they were filled about 3/4 full. And we found in Crawford Creek. We actually found an area where kokanee had been spawning. So we put them in that area, feeling fish probably in a good spot. And we put 15 of these in. And just a couple of weeks ago, we went down. They usually hatch about February. So we went down to dig them up and see how many were there. And as you can see by the picture here, there are less than half left in there that are unhatched. So we got about a 50% hatch rate. 2 of the ones that I dug up actually had elvins coming out of it. That's the little kokanee that were hatched. And when I pulled it out, there was a whole bunch of them into the rocks. So we dug 9 of them up and had a look to see what we had. Carry on. That's eggs that we dumped out into the creek. We just took what was left over and poured them out into the creek. Tubes that we dug out. So I think we're fish eggs in amongst the gravel. Some of them you can see little black marks, looks like they started but didn't complete. So that was our project for this year, and probably in the next few years we have a development, we have a spawning channel that we'd like to develop, try to increase more spawning ground. So it's an ongoing. Oh, that's.
Oh, I should actually, I'll let you.
Garth, given that the Meadow Creek provincial facility was supposed to replace all the spawning beds that were destroyed by the Duncan Dam, and did for quite a few years, and now has fallen so dramatically, do they give any explanation or reason for that fall?
A lot of it, what they've told us is they got an overabundance of large fish. The big fish came up. They ate themselves out of their own food source. So now it's dropped off. So they demolished the kokanee stock. I believe they had a bit of a disease there a few years ago that probably took some of them down. But the biologists are saying that they kind of ate themselves out of a food source.
Are the large fish the Gerard rainbows?
Gerard rainbow and Dolly Garden. And just as an example of what has happened there 20 years ago or more, if you entered a fish derby, if you didn't have an 18-pound fish, you didn't even bother entering. This year, the winning one in the last derby was a little over 8 pounds. But there's still good fishing, from 2 to 10 pounds. There's still catching. The big ones are few and far between.
Garth, here, I'm intrigued by the egg cases that you have there. When they hatch, they're able to get out through the
Yes.
holes?
Yeah, the holes are big enough that they can hold the egg in, but once they hatch, they're able to
And-
scoot out of there.
What sort of hoops did you have to jump through to be allowed to do that with fisheries and all kinds of?
Nothing really. Fisheries came down and actually assisted us with it. They believe the eggs came also from the Bull River Trout Hatchery. I know the fry that we've been putting in the last couple of years, they all came from Bull River. So we had a couple of the fisheries guys come down with us. They actually brought cases and the fish eggs and everything. We just filled them and dug them into the channel.
In your opinion, is it better to use the eggs than to do the flat fry release?
I don't know. I don't know what the difference would be. I think probably the fry might be better. I know the success rate of hatching eggs is pretty small. As you can see from this, we didn't quite get 50%. There's more than 50% left in the tubes.
But would the eggs be cheaper?
I don't know. Good question.
Well, to answer that question, we'll know in about 3 years whether fries
What comes back?
are better.
Yes,
versus eggs.
yeah. But we've had some success. We counted when we first started. Very rough estimate, just guys going up the creek counting under 100. And last year they figured there was probably closer to 500 or 600 spawning.
So let's have Alan and then Laura. Oh, okay.
I just thought it would be worth your mentioning that your group has also been carrying out water quality monitoring while you're
Yes.
doing this. So you're getting some baseline as of now, anyway, information on what kind of quality.
Yeah,
water
actually,
you're
that was
using.
the first thing we started doing because we didn't know, what was there. But the creek runs through a golf course, and of course they fertilize and put various chemicals down. So we started monitoring Crawford Creek to see if in fact it would support fish. We knew there were some going up, but not very many. And as it turns out, it's been very good. Anyone else?
Any questions on the webinar as well? Feel free to type them.
I just have a question. I know initially you guys were thinking of looking at like trying to reestablish on several creeks on that
Yes.
farm. Are you still, is that still an ambition or?
Oh, yes. But trying to get funding and get this all done, it just moves along very slowly.
Well, even 50%, I mean, they lay millions of eggs. If you get 50%, you're really helping.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think even in nature, they don't get
No. And then, of course, a lot of them that once they've hatched, they don't survive. And that's something we have to look at. Where the creek goes through the golf course, it's wide open for quite a stretch. So there's no shelter for fish. Very little spawning area in that area. So one of our next projects needs to try to stabilize the banks, prevent erosion, and get some better habitat for them along through that section of the creek.
So I'm assuming your intent is to do the fish inventory in 3 years?
Yes.
To sort of figure out what.
Yeah.
what you're getting at.
Laura was just asking about fish inventory, and they're going to be doing one in the next 3 years for those on the webinar. It's hard to hear.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you just doing the one Okay, so what we have some, I think I'd like to call for the shorter, the more informal group updates. And I'm going to ask you to try to get us to stop around noon for Pat's presentation. Okay. So who would like to, let's see, where are we? Shirley, Laura, anything from, well, Shirley, anything from Main Street? Or we'll do that, okay. And how about Stewart, how about you start with Joseph Creek?
Are you gonna come up? Okay. If you just want to introduce yourself to
I
the
will,
group and to
yeah.
the webinar.
My name's Stewart Wilson. I'm a retired teacher. I guess I've been involved with Joseph Creek since the late 1990s when, as a teacher, my class were invited to take part in a Joseph Creek Day, which was basically raising our awareness about Joseph Creek and its importance, giving my grade 4s an opportunity to make their own little watersheds above the reservoir. And it also made me stop and think about, where does their water come from? Now I know. It doesn't just come out of our tap. And having participated in Children's Festival in Cranbrook over several years, that's the first question I usually ask, because by this time, my older daughter had been to Africa, and that raised my awareness even further. Water in Africa. We have so much water, but at the same time, what do you do when you don't have much? So my question at Children's Festival back in those days was, if you to carry your own water, would that change the way you think about it and the way you use it? And of course it would. I was also part of a group called Kootenai River Network back in the early days, which I think latterly became mainstream. And I remember this particular day we went down to the States, just over the border near Eureka, and we saw some great projects where farmers had help in restoring the riparian areas which had often been washed out during flooding. The following day, I'm back in Cranbrook. It was a Friday, and I'm looking at our local creek. And I can't believe my eyes because it was run dry. And that was the day, I guess, when I became an advocate for Joseph Creek. I made many phone calls during the rest of that afternoon. And thanks to Laura and Jim Duncan, they got together, arranged to have a meeting in Cranbrook of interested people. And Joseph Creek Streamkeepers was born. It's not a big organization, there's just a very few of us. Good to see Jerry, because Jerry's been involved for a number of years. Most people don't know the name of the creek flowing through their city and don't realize that although it doesn't provide 100%, it probably provides about 50–60% of the creek water supplemented by Gold Creek. It's been in the news for the last few years because we suddenly realized that our dam at Idlewild, which had been the original reservoir, needed repairs, and there was a danger of catastrophic flooding. So Idlewild has been in the news a lot, and the dam has been repaired. And supposedly the city will make Joseph Creek a priority and spend lots of money on it, but would you think of involving Joseph Creek Streamkeepers? I guess not, but that's politics. About the same time as I was learning more about our creek, I was also part of an early movement, the Columbia Basin Environmental Educator Network, and I was a board member and had the pleasure of going down to the States to meet other people who were part of the Columbia Basin. And it was amazing just going into a room where strips of tarp, blue tarp, now showed you the whole network of rivers. And of course, now we've got the Columbia Basin Network organization ourselves, our water network. Joseph Creek Streamkeepers weren't instrumental, but Laura and Jim and their funding applications saw tremendous work done in Kinsman Park in riparian restoration. And more recently, Spooner Park, which is between our high school and the Western Financial Place, has been a showcase for riparian restoration. and something called permagills, which in simple language I think are plants supporting plants, but well suited. And just in the last few days, the high school students have been working with Laura to make sure that the permagills continue to thrive, protected from deer. And I see students as a real opportunity for us to get the word out, and it's really important. Why would students care? Well, you have to be introduced to it. And as a teacher, I made a point of taking my kids to water sources on a regular basis. I was very close to Elizabeth Lake when they learned that Elizabeth Lake empties out and eventually finishes up in Joseph Creek. It made sense at the end of the year, especially after, and it was great for Joe Louis to be here and talk, because 2 years ago, one of my last field trips was down to the Kootenai River to see sturgeon release and have my students involved in that. And Joe Pierre, chief of the Tunaha, he would come to our school often, and over the years, kids got to know the story of the Tunaha creation legend. And although it was a legend, it had some meaning for them, especially when their teacher helped them to draw a very basic Columbia Basin with the Rockies, the Purcells, the Selkirks, and the Monashees, and these two main rivers, which get very close together at the source, and then part one goes down to the United States. And I tell my friends, well, it changes its mind. It doesn't like to stay there. It comes back up. And, you know, it all meets over at Castlegar. And, of course, they knew about stories about skin coots. And it starts to make sense for them. And one of the last field trips I also did was we went down the Joseph Creek watershed and finished up at the confluence with the St. Mary River. And we were also very fortunate to be invited, I had arranged for it, to be invited onto the reserve and to see the hoodoos, which tell the story of the moose which was chasing the mice and the sisters. It just all made sense to the kids. And I think I would like, one of the other things I really enjoyed was that particular day, the bus driver, he knew all about the fruit farms that had been growing fruit beside Joseph Creek in the middle of town, which now is an apartment block, and somebody else had swum at this particular part where over the years it had been made into a 90-degree corner, completely unnatural. And I think the fact that the potential for the flooding downtown, if our dam didn't hold, has made more people aware of the importance of not building in floodplains. And I'm hopeful that things will improve, and it was great to travel down over the various watersheds this morning with Laura and Shirley. So thank you very much for the invitation. I take it there are no questions.
I had a chance to present to the Know Your Watershed educator group a couple of weeks ago. They were doing a training. It was just one of the things I'm hoping that we can follow up on is making sure that the Know Your Watershed educators are linked up with our member groups. And so we agreed, Dave Quinn and
Yes.
that group agreed that we should do more of that. So I think Laura, would you like to come up and talk to the people on the
I'm Laura Duncan. I'm with the Mainstreams Environmental Society, and it's really neat that Stewart talked about the Kootenai River and it going across the border, because Mainstreams began as a partner of the Kootenai River Network, which is a Montana-based group. And as you know, creeks and rivers don't pay attention to borders, so we joined forces in trying to be collaborative in dealing with this big river. And Stewart didn't mention it, but he is now a board member of Mainstream. So all of that work that he's done in the last number of years has led to him helping to guide our current organization. Mainstreams, although we've done some restoration work and we do a lot of monitoring work, we're currently the coordinators and administrators of the Columbia Basin Water Quality Monitoring Project. But our main emphasis is about education. So we've developed, I think, about 8 programs now that mainly go into the schools, many of which are field-based and some of which are classroom-based. And that's where a lot of our energy goes, because we feel like, you know, we're doing our jobs, but we really need to make sure that that generation coming up understands the importance of not only water, especially water in the case of our groups, but certainly the rest of the environment out there. So we really focus on things like the stream trailer, which is a mobile trailer that has its own pump and reservoir, and it really mimics the way streams work. It's particularly good at showing how erosion takes place, but it captures the attention of both adults and kids, and it just, boy, it just blows their mind how they understand things so quickly. And we have a whole bunch of other projects that we have some great educators that go out and deliver these to schools and also to community events. Right now, we're expanding our education projects, and we're also focusing more and more on the community of Kimberley, which is where we're actually based, and really trying to develop the awareness of watershed to the community members who don't really understand what the watershed of Kimberley is. As Stewart mentioned, most of the people in Cranbrook don't know the name of Joseph Creek, let alone where it comes from and the tributaries that feed into it. The same is true in Kimberley. And so we're really focusing on Kimberley more and more, and that's where we're at.
Thanks.
Any questions?
Awesome.